Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Aeschylus, the ancient Greek dramatist. Probably of the three ancient Greek tragedians whose work survives in any great amount, Aeschylus is probably my favorite. Even Seven Against Thebes, which is at best a passable play, I kind of like it. Seven Against Thebes is generally regarded as Aeschylus's worst play and one of the least dramatically interesting of the entire canon of surviving Greek tragedy. But even that, I'm a fan. But I want to talk about a couple of sort of crucial things about Aeschylus's style and his ideology that we, at least from what we can glean from the surviving plays. And only about 7 of Aeschylus's plays survive, and I've done videos on all of them, although I treated the Oresteia trilogy in one video. Aeschylus is the earliest of the big 3 tragedians that survive. So he starts writing earlier in the 5th century BCE than Sophocles and Euripides do. So one stylistic thing that I'm going to talk more about later on in this video is this idea that's, I think, controversial among classicists, that in some way Aeschylus's drama is closer to a pre-dramatic form of ritual. But before I talk about that, I want to talk some about his ideology and some of the thematic things that Aeschylus is concerned about. Particularly democracy, his interest in democracy, which is linked to patriotism, Athenian patriotism, and I want to talk about his optimism. So, Aeschylus, of the 3 big tragedians, I think Aeschylus gives us the best look at and the best advocacy for Greek Athenian democracy. We see this in plays like The Suppliants, which, as I said in my video on that, is one of my favorite ancient Greek plays, probably my all-time favorite ancient Greek play. He talks about the process of democracy, including describing the showing of right hands as a way of voting. And he has King Pelasgos in that play, even though it would not have been the case in archaic Argos. King Pelasgos asserts that he, as a king, cannot make a decision without the support of the Argive council. So we have this very overt description of democracy and how it works. In the Oresteia trilogy, the culmination of that is the establishment of trial by jury in Athens, which was a central component of Athenian democracy. It was civic engagement in one of the most important components for ancient Greek society. Juries voted on guilt or innocence, and so it was very much bound up in the democratic process. In the Persians, which is generally thought to be one of Aeschylus's earliest plays from around 472 BCE, the chorus at one point tells Atossa, the Persian queen, that the Greeks are ruled by no one. They are no one's slaves. And so again, all of this is tied up both to democracy, which Aeschylus seems to be very much in favor of, even, again, in the Oresteia, attributing it to divine creation by Athena, but who was, of course, patron deity of Athens. But it's also tied up with Athenian patriotism. And in her book, The Classical Debt, Johanna Hanink talks about how 5th century Athens built the Athenian brand. And Aeschylus is very clearly part of this idea of promoting Athenian values of equality before the law, civic engagement, freedom of speech, and so on and so on. these democratic values and dispersing that ideology throughout both the Delian League and the wider Greek-speaking world through theatrical performances, through things like Pericles' speeches, funeral orations, things like this. So Aeschylus is very much in this vein. The other sort of ideological thing that I see in Aeschylus's work is optimism. Like, he's very much, and I think this is tied to the democracy element, but Aeschylus is very interested in these stories of sort of progress. He has faith in the forward movement of humanity. And we see this, again, in the Oresteia most clearly because that trilogy survives. We move from the Agamemnon. We move from Agamemnon, the early play, the first play of the trilogy, where violence is used to settle personal scores. This is a sort of vendetta culture, to the Eumenides, the last play of the trilogy, where again, Athena has established trial by jury and justice is codified, justice is democratized, and justice is no longer based on violence and the rule of the strongest. So this is an optimistic element. But we've also got a sense of some of the plays that are lost. And in the critical introduction to Prometheus Bound in this Oxford, the Complete Aeschylus Volume 2, C. John Harrington talks about the other two plays that were part of the Prometheus Cycle, or the Promethea, as it's sometimes called. And he talks about what happens, because Prometheus Bound is the first play. The second play would have been Prometheus Unbound, and then the third play would have been probably called something like Prometheus the Fire Carrier. And the way C. John Harrington, author of the introduction to the Prometheus Bound in here, says, the general drift of the trilogy now becomes clear also. It is a universal progress from confusion and torment at all levels of the universe toward peace and joy. So the Prometheus Cycle would have been characterized first by Prometheus's suffering, then Prometheus's release in the second play, and then the reconciliation between Prometheus and Zeus and the establishment of their friendship in the third play. So Aeschylus, again, is this very optimistic playwright who believes in forward progress, believes that things fundamentally get better across time, or maybe that they can get better across time. The other thing I want to talk about is a stylistic thing. And there's a lot of debate about among classicists and about the early history of Greek tragedy, of Greek drama. A group called the Cambridge Ritualists had this idea that tragedy started out as choral songs, religious rituals, choral songs, and then, according to legend, at some point, Thespis, hence the term Thespian as a term for actors, Thespis had the great innovation of adding a single speaking part. So in this version, and I'm not sure the Cambridge Ritualists sort of took this as direct history, but they did believe that drama evolved out of an earlier, more simplistic ritual form. But according to myth, Thespis basically created the idea of acting by having one person with a speaking role and then the chorus responding. Then, in this theory, Aeschylus comes along in the 5th century BCE and says, oh, actually, I can have two actors, two speaking roles, and then the chorus responding to them. Whether or not that's historically accurate I'm not going to weigh in on. But one of the things that we see pretty consistently across Aeschylus's drama is that you almost never, maybe never ever, have more than two characters speaking on stage at a time. And this really struck me when I was rereading The Persians and Prometheus Bound. In, say, Prometheus Bound, you start out with Violence and Hephaestus speaking. Prometheus is on stage, but for the duration of and Prometheus is a speaking role, but for the duration of the time that Violence and Hephaestus are on stage, Prometheus never speaks. It's only the two of them. Prometheus doesn't speak until they leave the stage. And then Prometheus remains on stage the entirety of the play. He's joined by Ocean, he's joined by Io, he's joined by Hermes, but only ever one at a time. The chorus is there, but Prometheus speaks to Ocean and then Ocean leaves. Then Io enters. This is not all direct, there's other stuff that happens in between this, but then Io enters, talks to Prometheus, Io leaves, Hermes enters, talks to Prometheus, and then the play ends. So they're never on stage at the same time. We can see the same kind of thing in The Persians, again, one of the earliest plays written by Aeschylus. The messenger comes on and off, depending on how many other speaking actors are on stage. Atossa comes on and off, depending on how many speaking actors are on stage. Atossa and Darius are on stage at the same time, they speak, but the messenger isn't there. Atossa and the messenger speak, but Darius isn't there. Xerxes shows up, but again, there's never more than two speaking characters on stage at a time. So this is a very significant characteristic of Aeschylus's drama, and it's actually something that Sophocles moves beyond by adding a third actor. But this is one of the things that, and again, there are newer interpretations that sort of go beyond this, but this is one of the reasons why Aeschylus has traditionally been thought of as a sort of early dramatist whose work points back to a more simple structure, a more simple ritual structure, where you just had a chorus without actors speaking.